What does Paul learn from the Lord that was previously not revealed to him? This is the question we seek to answer today as we continue our verse-by-verse study of the book of Acts on walking through the Bible. Today we're going to be discussing Acts chapter 23, verses 11 to 22. But before we do that, let's read the passage. If you have a Bible with you, you can turn to Acts chapter 3, verse 11. But if you don't have a Bible, don't worry. Just follow along with us on the screen. The version that we'll be reading from is the New King James Version. So Acts chapter 23, beginning at verse 11. But the following night the Lord stood by him and said, "Be of good cheer, Paul, for as you have testified for me in Jerusalem, so you must also bear witness at Rome." And when it was day, some of the Jews banded together and bound themselves under an oath, saying that they would neither eat nor drink till they had killed Paul. Now there were more than 40 who had formed this conspiracy. Then they came to the chief priests and elders and said, "We have bound ourselves under a great oath that we will eat nothing until we have killed Paul. Now you therefore, together with the council, suggest to the commander that he be brought down to you tomorrow, as though you were going to make further inquiries concerning him. But we are ready to kill him before he comes near." So when Paul's sister's son heard of their ambush, he went and entered the barracks and told Paul. Then Paul called one of the centurions to him and said, "Take this young man to the commander, for he has something to tell him." So he took him and brought him to the commander and said, "Paul the prisoner called me to him and asked me to bring this young man to you. He has something to say to you." Then the commander took him by the hand, went aside, and asked privately, "What is it that you have to tell me?" And he said, "The Jews have agreed to ask that you bring Paul down to the council tomorrow, as though they were going to inquire more fully about him. But do not yield to them, for more than 40 of them lie in wait for him, men who have bound themselves by an oath that they will neither eat nor drink till they have killed him. And now they are ready, waiting for the promise from you." So the commander let the young man depart and commanded him, "Tell no one that you have revealed these things to me." Paul has been taken prisoner by the Romans, arrested after the Jews caused a riot in the temple. Paul revealed to the Roman commander that he was in fact a Roman citizen, which has afforded him more rights than he would have received had he simply been Jewish. Paul spoke to the crowd in order to get them to realize why he was a Christian and to vow to them that he had not defiled the temple by bringing a Gentile into it. This didn't work. The commander, knowing that he could not keep a Roman citizen in jail without charges, sent Paul bound to the Jewish council in order to learn more about the matter and possibly come up with a charge. This didn't work either, as the council was split once Paul told them that he was a Pharisee, being held only because of his belief in the hope of the resurrection of the dead. Since there were Sadducees on the council who denied there was a resurrection of the dead, that's why the division formed. Yet the commander still had an issue. Paul was in prison, uncharged. Yet if he released Paul, Paul is likely to be killed by the Jews. Killing a Roman would bring even more scrutiny not only on the commander, but Jerusalem as well, which could lead to unrest. What was he to do? Coming to verse 11 now, with Paul in prison, it's easy to see that Paul could get discouraged. The Lord thus stood by him in prison, meaning that he appeared to Paul in prison, telling him to be of good cheer. Why? Because Paul had done good by testifying about Jesus in Jerusalem. Now he would testify about him in Rome too. I'd like us to note two things from this statement. The first thing is that if you recall from chapter 22, Jesus told Paul some 20 years before to flee from Jerusalem, for they would not hear him, but instead he would be sent to the Gentiles. Paul did what he was told there, and success followed. In this case, Paul got to preach in Jerusalem about Jesus, but the attitude of the Jews hadn't changed, showing us that Jesus was right in the first place. However, just as before, Jesus told Paul that he would leave Jerusalem, with this time going to get an opportunity to preach the gospel in Rome. Up until this point, Paul had preached in Asia Minor and in parts of what we call Europe today, but he had never reached the capital, though he told the Roman Christians at the end of the book of Romans, written earlier while at Corinth, that he desired to do so. The Lord here confirmed that desire would be fulfilled, which brings us to the next thing we should note, that Paul didn't have access to all of his future. We've made this point before, but it bears repeating. Paul thought he was going to die in Jerusalem because the Holy Spirit revealed to him that he would be arrested. It was not unreasonable to assume that this arrest would lead to execution, but that's all it was, an assumption. Paul's assumption was wrong, for the Lord still had work for him to do. And I believe the Lord is at work through his providence throughout the rest of this book in protecting Paul along the way until he gets to Rome. The first part of that work is that word came to the right person about a plot to kill Paul, for unbeknownst to the Romans, there were some Jews who had vowed not to eat or drink anything until they had killed Paul. Who found out about this plot? None other than Paul's nephew, the son of Paul's sister. Now, up until this point, we didn't know that Paul had a sister, but here we find out that he did. What this nephew was doing in Jerusalem, we're unsure, but suffice it to say, he was there. So who better for Jesus to use to help save Paul's life than Paul's own family? Paul's nephew came to the centurion who sent him on to the commander in order for the commander to learn of this plot. The idea was that the chief priests were to ask the commander to bring Paul back to them under the guise that they wanted to question him further. When this happened, those who swore to kill Paul, numbering 40 in all, would lay in wait, and when Paul was carried down from the Anatolia fortress, they would ambush the soldiers, executing Paul, and likely the soldiers along with him. That these 40 men didn't seem to care what the Romans would do afterwards showed you the amount of hatred these men had for Paul, and that they were willing to die so long as Paul died too. Paul's nephew told the commander not to heed the council's request, advice that the commander will heed. He told the nephew not to tell anyone what he had just revealed, for if the commander is to succeed in not having Paul killed by the Jews, he would have to hatch a plan to outsmart them. What would that plan be? We'll find out, the Lord willing, in the next lesson. With that, our time is up for today. The Lord willing, we hope you'll join us for tomorrow's discussion of Acts chapter 23, verses 23 to 35, as we continue our walk through the Bible, one verse at a time. Thank you for watching today's episode. We hope that you found it edifying and ask that you not only subscribe to our channel and podcast, but that you like and share this episode among your friends, so that the saving gospel of Jesus Christ can go out to the whole world.